He stood in the doorway of my living room, a house I built, a life I paid for, and spoke like a landlord. "Pay the rent or move out," he said, my own son-in-law, ordering me to leave my home. My daughter couldn't even look at me. Her silence was louder than his arrogance. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg. I just nodded, the way men do when they've already made a decision. From that moment, every smile, every dinner, every small kindness was a mask. I watched him sip my whiskey, brag about his property, never realizing he was standing on ground I was already selling. Revenge doesn't need rage. It needs patience, and I had plenty. If you've ever stayed silent just long enough to strike back, like, subscribe, and share this story. Tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from? The sound of the ocean used to calm me. Now it only reminds me how silence can drown a man long before the tide reaches him. I built this house 34 years ago. Every line of its frame, every window placed for light, not luxury. Back then, my hands were steadier. My name meant something in the city. Architects don't leave much behind except what they build, and I built this place to last. When I retired, I thought I'd spend my final years here, watching the sea shift from silver to black, content in the quiet. Then my daughter married him. Ethan arrived with a handshake that lasted a second too long, the kind men use when they're testing you. My daughter Clara glowed when he entered a room. She said he was ambitious, hungry, her word, and that he'd make her happy. I didn't tell her that hunger has no loyalty. It devours what feeds it. For a while I tolerated him. He liked to show me articles about property trends, talk about how money should move, not sit. He'd pour himself whiskey from my decanter and compliment my taste as if the bottle belonged to him. Little gestures, small trespasses. I told myself it was harmless. I was wrong. When my wife passed, Clara and Ethan moved in to help around the place. I didn't need help, but grief makes you soft. I let them. Within months, his shoes were at the door, his car in my garage, his opinions filling my dining room. He started referring to the home as our house. Clara smiled when he said it. I didn't. The first real crack came one evening in late October. The air carried salt and smoke, and the fire had gone cold. I was sitting in the study reviewing old project sketches when he appeared in the doorway, casual, hands in pockets, a glass of my whiskey in hand. He looked around the room like a man inspecting a property he might buy. "You know, Dad," he said, "Clara and I were thinking maybe it's time we handled the bills here." "It's a lot for you," I looked up. "Handled?" He shrugged. "Well, it's a big place. Maintenance, taxes. We could start paying rent to make things easier. Or," he paused, smiling, "you could contribute if you want to stay." There was a long moment where I said nothing. He mistook it for hesitation. It wasn't. It was calculation. My daughter entered just then, towel in hand, stopping when she realized what he'd said. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. That silence, that tiny, cowardly silence, became the sound that built my resolve. I stood, straightened my jacket, and said only, "I'll think about it." He laughed. "Sure, but don't take too long." He left the room with the arrogance of a man who believed he'd won something. I sat back down, tracing my thumb over the edge of the old compass on my desk, the one I used to draft the blueprints of this house. The steel was still cold, still perfect, unlike the man walking through my walls as if he owned them. That night, I poured myself a glass of water instead of whiskey. The silence of the estate felt heavier than usual, the ocean quieter, as if waiting. I walked to the study window and looked out at the dark water. Ownership, I thought, isn't about possession. It's about patience, and I have always been patient. The next morning, the ocean looked different. Same horizon, but sharper, as if even the light had learned to watch its step. I made coffee the way I always do, 1 cup, black, no sugar. The sound of the machine was the only thing that still belonged to me. Clara and Ethan came down late. He was wearing my robe, talking about some meeting in the city. She smiled too brightly. They moved through the kitchen as if I were furniture. I watched them from the terrace, coffee cooling between my hands. I'd built hundreds of structures in my life, but that morning I started designing something else, a plan measured in silence, drawn in patience. When they left, I went to my study. The old compass gleamed in the half-light. I opened the drawer beneath it and pulled out the deed to the estate. My name, embossed in fading ink, sat above a string of numbers and signatures. His name was nowhere near it. Not yet. I placed the deed flat on the desk, laid a fresh sheet of tracing paper over it, and began to draw. The lines weren't walls or hallways this time. They were pathways of consequence. Where he saw ownership, I saw opportunity. He wanted control. I would hand him the illusion of it until it became a noose. That week I invited an old friend, Arthur Hale, to lunch. Peter is a lawyer who never lost his taste for quiet favors. We met at a seaside restaurant where the chairs still creaked from the salt. Still keeping that place of yours? He asked, stirring his drink. For now, I said. But I might be ready to simplify. Thinking of transferring it to family. Eventually, he smiled. You never do anything eventually, Arthur. I only said, draft the paperwork as if I were selling. Private file. My name only. By the time the bill arrived, the first piece was in motion. Back home, Ethan had taken over the living room with his laptop and loud phone calls. Investors, he told Clara. I heard panic under the charm. The man was bleeding money. He needed this house not for comfort, but collateral. I let him think it was working. At dinner, he talked about upgrading the property, suggesting changes to the landscape I designed decades ago. Maybe glass fencing by the cliffside, he said. Would raise the value, I nodded. Good idea. Why don't you get some quotes? He grinned, pleased with himself, not realizing I'd just invited him to dig his own financial grave. After they went to bed, I walked the halls. Every light, every reflection felt like a ghost of what I'd built. I stopped before the turned-down family portrait on the wall. My wife's smile was still there. Clara's was younger, unbroken. I whispered to her memory. You taught her to love, not to see. I picked up the frame, placed it face down on the console, and left it that way. A small act, but it marked the point of no return. Over the next few days, I spoke little. I watched more. He spent freely, showing off to guests, scheduling improvements he couldn't afford. Clara avoided my eyes at breakfast. She must have sensed the shift, the cold calm that fills a room before a storm. One evening, I found him again in my study, using my desk to sign some papers. Hope you don't mind. Dad, he said without looking up. Good light in here. Not at all, I replied. Good light helps a man see what he's doing. He didn't catch the meaning. They never do. That night I made my first call to the realtor. Quiet voice, private line. We arranged a meeting for Monday morning. The ocean outside roared against the rocks, restless and gray. It sounded nothing like peace, but everything like purpose. Revenge isn't sudden. It's drawn, measured, and built to hold. By the time the first frost touched the windows, I'd already begun construction. Monday arrived dressed in mist. The sea had turned the color of pewter, and the horizon dissolved into a single gray line. I watched it from the terrace, coffee untouched. The kind of morning where sound travels slower. The air felt deliberate, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Arthur Hale met me downtown at his office, a place that smelled of polished wood and legal caution. His handshake was firm, familiar. I drew up what you asked, he said, sliding a folder across the desk. It's just paperwork for now, nothing binding until you sign. I studied the pages the way I used to read blueprints, noting structure, pressure points, load-bearing lines. It wasn't revenge I wanted, not really. It was restoration, of balance, of dignity, of quiet. When I left, the city seemed noisier than I remembered. Everyone was buying something, selling something, chasing something. I had already caught mine. Back at the estate, Ethan was on a call by the pool, voice louder than the wind. Investors, he said again when he noticed me. He had the easy charm of a man who performs wealth rather than holds it. My daughter sat nearby, pretending to read. Her eyes followed him with an affection I no longer recognized. Everything all right, Dad? She asked when he stepped away. Perfectly, I said. I was just thinking how beautiful the place still looks this time of year. She smiled weakly. It's your design. It always will be. I wanted to believe her. Inside, I opened my study window and let the salt air in. On the desk, the compass glinted beside the new folder. Paper, ink, signatures, such quiet tools for such loud consequences. I began listing valuations, land, furnishings, art. Years of precision had taught me how to calculate without emotion. That evening I invited Clara and Ethan to dinner. A small gesture to keep the peace, or at least the illusion of it. The table was set with my wife's crystal, the same way she used to when celebrations still meant something. Candlelight smoothed every edge. Ethan talked about expanding his firm, about streamlining assets. He liked that phrase, streamlining. I asked polite questions, the kind that sound supportive but measure character. His answers revealed everything, bravado masking fear, ambition chasing debt. "You've built quite a life," I said at last. He grinned. "Trying to catch up to you, old man." I lifted my glass, meeting his eyes. "You may find the foundation harder than the view," he laughed, thinking it a compliment. My daughter looked between us, sensing a language she couldn't translate. After they left the table, I remained a while, tracing the rim of the glass. My reflection in the window was older than I remembered. Yet behind the lines, there was something steady, an architect's calm before construction. Later that night, I walked the grounds. The tide was low, the rocks breathing under the moonlight. Every stone, every beam of the house whispered memory, the laughter of my wife, the child Clara once was, the promise that walls could hold a family together. Somewhere along the years, we forgot that promises need maintenance too. I returned to the study and sealed the first envelope for Peter. Documentation, appraisals, nothing irreversible yet. I placed it beside the compass and turned off the light. The house settled around me with the faint groan of age, a sound like an old friend shifting in his sleep. People think revenge is an explosion. It isn't, it's architecture. You draw the line, set the foundation, and wait for time to bear the weight. What I was building now wasn't destruction, it was clarity. And clarity can be far colder than anger. Outside, the sea rolled against the cliff, patient and certain, and I found myself whispering. Not a promise, not a threat, just a single truth. No one ever owns what they don't understand. Days passed with the stillness that precedes a storm. Nothing changed on the surface, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The ocean outside my window remained a patient sheet of steel, disguising the current beneath. Clara began spending more time in the garden. She'd stand among the hydrangeas her mother planted and stare at the sea without really seeing it. Guilt has a posture. Hers was the quiet kind, shoulders drawn, hands clasped like prayer. Ethan, meanwhile, had become a permanent presence in the house. He spoke loudly into phones, made declarations to no one in particular about new partnerships. His tone carried that strange mix of confidence and desperation you only hear from men who fear the ground giving way. I kept my distance. Mornings were for correspondence, polite notes to brokers, measured conversations with Peter. Afternoons, I walked the perimeter of the property, memorizing the rhythm of footsteps on the stone paths. Even architecture, I've learned, records a man's thoughts. The more deliberate my movements became, the more invisible I felt. One evening, Clara followed me into the study. She hesitated in the doorway, the same place where Ethan once stood. "Dad," she said softly, "you're different lately." "Older," I replied. "That's not it." She stepped closer. "You're quieter. Like you're preparing for something." I closed the folder in front of me. "Preparation is the only thing that keeps buildings from collapsing." She frowned, searching for the metaphor. "You're not a building." "No," I said, "but I did design the one you live in." She looked down, tracing the edge of the desk with her fingertips. "He can be difficult sometimes," she said finally. "You know how he is, proud. He doesn't mean—" "Every man means what he says when he thinks no one will challenge him," I interrupted. "The trick is deciding when silence becomes permission." She said nothing after that. Her silence, once painful, had turned into something else, acknowledgement, perhaps even apology. When she left, I realized she hadn't defended him. That was new. The next morning, a letter arrived from Peter, confirmation that initial inquiries had been made. No commitment yet, just movement. The kind that's felt before it's seen. I folded the letter neatly and locked it in the drawer beneath the compass. At breakfast, Ethan mentioned that he might need to use the house as temporary leverage for a business line. Short term, he said casually, buttering toast. We'll all benefit once things pick up. Clara's hand froze around her cup. Ethan. He waved her off. Just paperwork. It's standard. I watched the exchange like an architect studying stress fractures. You should speak with a professional before using assets you don't fully control, I said. He smirked. Thanks for the advice, but I know what I'm doing. Confidence without comprehension. The oldest fault line of all. That afternoon, I sat in my wife's old armchair by the window, the same place where she used to read. The sea had turned darker, the kind of gray that steals definition. I thought of all the years I'd spent designing homes to survive storms, yet never one to survive pride. By evening, the tension in the house had thickened. Clara's footsteps were softer, measured. Ethan's calls grew shorter. There's a particular silence that settles right before realization. You can almost hear the weight of it. I returned once more to the study, opened the drawer, and unfolded Peter's letter again. The lines of text were calm, professional, the perfect mask. Beneath them, I sensed the first real shift. I didn't smile. Satisfaction isn't the right word for what I felt. It was something quieter, more exact. Like the click of a lock engaging, or the settling of a structure that finally knows what it's meant to hold. Outside, the tide began to rise, the sound echoing through the glass walls like distant applause. And for the first time in weeks, I whispered to the empty room, let him keep talking. The house listens better than he does. The days grew shorter, and with them the light inside the house changed. Morning sun no longer filled the rooms. It sliced through them, thin and deliberate. The kind of light that reveals dust where you thought there was order. I woke earlier than usual, made coffee, and sat in the study without turning on the lamp. Paperwork covered the desk like quiet architecture. Valuations, draft contracts, letters from Peter sealed in polite envelopes. Each line was progress disguised as bureaucracy. From the terrace, I could hear Ethan pacing while he talked on the phone. His voice carried easily through glass. Liquidity, extension, deadline. Words that sounded professional but tasted like panic. He was trying to borrow against something he didn't own. The irony had a symmetry I almost admired. Clara joined me later, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. She looked at the stack of papers but didn't ask. Is everything all right? She said. Everything is exactly as it should be, I told her. She nodded, though she didn't believe me. Truth never lands in a single moment. It seeps. That afternoon, I met Peter again in the city. We spoke quietly over lunch. Your buyer's still interested, he said. Discretion won't be an issue. Good, I answered. Discretion is the only currency left that holds value. He leaned back, studying me. You're certain about this? I built it once, I said. I can let it go once. He didn't press further. Lawyers know when silence is a signature. When I returned, the house felt heavier. Ethan had filled the living room with new furniture catalogs. We need to modernize, he said, waving a brochure. Fresh energy, higher resale potential. I almost laughed at the word resale. By all means, I told him. Do whatever you think will improve it. He looked surprised at my approval. Really? Really, I said. Just send me the invoices. He smiled the smile of a man confusing permission for partnership. That, too, was part of the structure. Later, after they'd gone to bed, I walked the corridors. Every photograph on the walls was a study in perspective. Faces lit by birthdays, holidays, moments that had once felt permanent. My wife's laughter lived in those frames. So did Clara's childhood. I wondered what Ethan saw when he looked at them. Assets, perhaps. I saw history, and history isn't for sale. In my room, I opened the small safe beneath the wardrobe. Inside was the original deed, the compass, and a letter addressed to Clara in my handwriting. Not for now, but for later, when the noise faded and the truth would need a voice. I ran my fingers along the envelope's edge, the paper thick and cool, and placed it back. The next morning, Peter called. Everything's ready. It's just timing now. Let the tide decide, I said. When I stepped outside, the sea was silver again, deceptively calm. Ethan stood by the edge of the terrace, talking into his phone, Voice raised. No, listen to me. There's collateral here, he said. Family property. It's secure. I stopped behind him. He didn't turn. You should be careful with promises, I said. They have a way of collecting interest, he half laughed. Always the philosopher. Always, I replied. He went back inside, muttering something about numbers. I watched his reflection in the glass door, blurred, distorted, temporary. Inside the study, I reviewed the final draft from Peter one last time. Everything was precise, valuation clauses, transfer conditions, confidentiality terms. Nothing vindictive, just elegant closure. Architecture, not explosion. Outside, the afternoon light shifted again, catching the silver compass on the desk. The needle didn't tremble. Neither did I. The house had become a gallery of echoes, footsteps, voices, plans. And within that quiet, a single truth solidified. What's built with patience can only be undone the same way. Morning arrived with rain. The glass walls blurred with water, turning the world outside into a slow-moving watercolor. I sat by the window and watched the droplets chase one another down to the terrace tiles. There's a certain peace in things that fall predictably. Clara joined me without a word. She held a mug in both hands like it might steady her. He's been in the city more lately, she said. Meetings, late dinners? He's worried, I can tell. I didn't answer. Worry has a scent. It travels faster than truth. She took a breath. I found some of your papers. Property valuations. Transfer notes, I turned to her. You were looking for them? Her eyes dropped. I was looking for reassurance. The honesty in her voice startled me. For the first time, she sounded like the girl who used to help me sand down model frames in my workshop. Patient and curious. I'm not doing anything illegal, I said. I didn't think you were, she replied quietly. But it feels like you're disappearing from this place. I wanted to tell her that I wasn't leaving. I was simply removing the noise that had taken residence in our lives. But words once spoken can't always hold the shape you intend. So I said, every design needs revision, even a home. That afternoon, I drove along the coast road into town. The cliffs were veiled in mist, the sea restless beneath them. I thought about how structures endure wind by yielding to it, not fighting. People could learn something from that. At the office, Peter reviewed the finalized paperwork. All signatures in order, he said. If you still want this executed, we can move ahead next week. I studied the folder. Next week, I repeated. That's soon. Sooner or later makes little difference, he said, once you've decided what the outcome should be. I nodded, but didn't confirm. It wasn't hesitation, it was reflection. Every design, no matter how sound, deserves a final inspection before the foundation sets. When I returned, the house smelled of rain and lavender polish. Clara was in the kitchen arranging flowers, an old habit of her mother's. You taught me to match stems by height, she said without turning. I remember. Some things stay balanced that way, she murmured. Ethan arrived later, dripping water across the marble floor. He kissed Clara on the cheek and muttered about traffic. His mood was brittle. One wrong word might have shattered it. I offered him a towel, and he accepted it like a peace offering he didn't trust. I hear the market's shifting, I said. He gave a dry laugh. Everyone hears something. You just have to hold steady. Steady is relative, I said. Depends on what you're standing on. He looked at me then, really looked, and for a second I thought he saw it. The outline of something he couldn't name. But he turned away, pouring himself a drink instead. That evening, the three of us ate dinner together for the first time in weeks. The rain softened, leaving a quiet you could almost hear breathing. Clara asked about my old projects, and I told her stories of buildings that still stood decades later. The key is foundation, I said. If it's flawed, the rest just waits for gravity. Ethan raised his glass. To foundations, he said. I raised mine as well. May they always remind us what's underneath. Later, when they'd gone upstairs, I walked the hall one last time before bed. The house creaked in the wind, old wood remembering every change in pressure. I realized then that revenge was never the real shape of this story. It was reclamation, of dignity, of space, of silence. What happens next will not break the house. It will simply reveal who truly lives in it. Outside, The sea kept its rhythm, indifferent and eternal. The rain stopped overnight, leaving the air scrubbed clean. The sea shone like metal under a pale sun. Even the gulls seemed quieter. I took it as a sign, clarity after noise. Peter's message came just after breakfast. All parties ready, waiting on your word, 5 words that could tilt an entire life. I read them twice, then set the phone face down beside my coffee. Ethan was already on a call in the next room. His voice had the polished edge of someone performing calm. Liquidity issue, he was saying. Minor delay. It'll clear. The lie was smooth, practiced. I admired the craft of it in the same way one admires a bridge built too close to the water. Beautiful, until the tide rises. Clara appeared at the doorway, hair still damp from her shower. "He's trying," she whispered, almost to herself. "I know," I said. "So am I," she hesitated. "Whatever you're doing, Dad, please don't let it destroy what's left." I looked at her. Truly looked. Some things have to be dismantled before they can be rebuilt. That afternoon, I drove to the city. Peter was waiting with the final folder open on his desk. The room smelled faintly of ink and lemon polish. "It's done once you sign," he said. Quietly, legally, clean. The pen felt heavier than I expected. "It's strange," I murmured. "I've spent a lifetime signing blueprints, approving what others would one day inhabit. This might be the first time I've signed something for myself." Peter nodded. "Every builder deserves a design of his own." When the pen lifted, a small tremor of relief passed through me. Not triumph, relief. The paperwork slid into its envelope with the soft precision of a door closing. Outside, the city was awash in late afternoon gold. I walked a few blocks before heading back, noticing details I'd once ignored, reflections in windows, the rhythm of pedestrians moving with private intent. Everyone was chasing permanence in a world built on leases. Back at the estate, the air smelled of salt and distant smoke. Clara was in the garden pruning wilted blooms. She looked up when I approached. "You went into town again?" "Yes. For work?" "In a way." She didn't press further, perhaps sensing that the answer would change something she wasn't ready to face. The wind lifted her hair, and for a moment I saw her mother in the way she steadied it behind her ear. I almost told her everything. Almost. Inside, Ethan had spread documents across the dining table. Spreadsheets, loan statements, bank letters, an autopsy of optimism. He looked up when I entered. "You ever feel like timing's against you?" he asked. "Only when I mistake hurry for progress," I said. He smiled thinly. "Maybe that's my problem." "Maybe," I agreed. He gathered the papers into a neat stack, the gesture oddly careful. "I'll fix it," he said. "You'll see." I wanted to tell him that fixing something broken doesn't always mean keeping it. Sometimes it means letting it fall, rebuilding differently. But wisdom offered too soon becomes insult. So I let silence stand. After dinner, I went to my study, opened the drawer, and placed Peter's envelope beside the compass. The two objects, one steel, one paper, balanced each other like intention and consequence. From upstairs came the muffled rhythm of footsteps, and then quiet. The house exhaled. I walked to the window and looked out at the ocean under a rising moon. It occurred to me that structures don't announce collapse. They whisper first, a soft shift in balance only the architect hears. This house had been whispering for months. I turned off the light and let darkness settle around me. Clear and precise. Tomorrow, signatures would become record. Tomorrow, illusion would meet architecture. And when the tide rolled in again, it would sound exactly the same, because the sea, like truth, never changes its tone. By morning, the sea had stilled again, the surface smooth as slate. The wind carried only the faint scent of salt and something older. Change, maybe. I stood on the terrace with my coffee and waited for the day to adjust to its new shape. Peter's message arrived at 8:15. Filed. Complete. 2 words this time, yet they landed heavier than all the noise that had come before them. For the first time in months, I felt an absence rather than a weight, like a room after furniture has been moved out. Empty but full of its own echo. Inside, Ethan was reading the financial section aloud, trying to sound casual. "Market's recovering," he said. "Might be a good time to leverage property assets," I nodded. "It might." He didn't notice that I never asked which assets he meant. Clara entered with her phone pressed to her ear, murmuring to someone from the gallery where she volunteered. She looked calm, but her eyes flicked between us, gauging air pressure. When she hung up, she asked, "You're both civil this morning." "Should I be worried?" I smiled. "No more than usual." The morning went on quietly, too quietly. I answered a few polite calls from Peter to confirm delivery, then filed everything away. It's strange how finality makes no sound, no applause, no alarm, just a line drawn in ink that no one can see until the light shifts. By afternoon, clouds rolled in from the west. The sky over the water darkened, a slow breeze spreading. Ethan left for the city, saying something about meetings that couldn't wait. His car tires hissed across the wet drive and the house fell still behind him. Clara found me in the study an hour later. "You've been sitting here all day," she said. "I like listening to the rain on the glass. You used to listen for waves. They sound the same if you stop naming them." She studied me, then stepped closer. "You did something, didn't you?" "Something? I can feel it. The air's different. He's nervous, you're calm, and I'm—" She broke off. "In between," I finished for her. "The hardest place to stand," she nodded. "I just don't want anyone to lose everything." I looked at her, the woman she had become, elegant, uncertain, compassionate to a fault. Sometimes loss is what teaches people the shape of what they still have. She didn't argue. She only turned toward the window, watching the first lightning flicker far out at sea. That evening, the storm arrived in earnest. Wind shook the glass panes, the kind of sound that finds its way into dreams. I poured a small measure of whiskey, habit, not celebration, and watched the reflections blur across the surface. When Ethan returned near midnight, rain still dripping from his coat, I heard him pause in the hallway. Perhaps he sensed something missing, some subtle rebalancing of ownership he couldn't name. He didn't speak. Just went upstairs. His footsteps were heavy, the sound of a man walking through his own doubts. I stayed in the study until the lights in their room dimmed. Then I opened the drawer, took out the compass, and set it beside the envelope marked "Final Copy." The needle quivered once, then steadied on north. Precision restored. I realized then that I didn't need to prove anything. The paperwork, the patience, the silence, they were never about reclaiming walls or deeds. They were about remembering the quiet authority of design. I had drawn the plan, followed every measurement, and let gravity do the rest. Outside, thunder rolled over the sea. The tide pressed against the rocks, tireless, impartial. Clara's words echoed in my mind. I just don't want anyone to lose everything. No one would, I decided. They would only lose illusion. And illusion, like fog, always lifts when morning comes. Morning arrived pale and exhausted, the sea stretched out like glass after a long argument with the night. The storm had washed the sky clean. Every color looked new. I opened the terrace doors and let the salt wind drift through the rooms. For the first time in months, the house smelled simply of air. Ethan was already awake, standing by the kitchen window with a mug of coffee he hadn't tasted. The tension that usually surrounded him had thinned into something quieter, almost fragile. He turned as I entered, searching my face for clues. "Rough night," he said. "Storms end," I replied. He nodded. "I suppose they do." Clara joined us moments later, her hair still damp, her voice soft. "You two look like strangers meeting for the first time." "In a way," I said. "We are." The day passed without confrontation. Small talk about errands, about weather, about nothing that mattered. Yet beneath every word, truth waited, unspoken but awake. By afternoon, Ethan found me in the study. The door stayed half open, the way one leaves it when they don't want to start a war. "I checked with the bank," he said. "They couldn't process something I expected. Apparently the property isn't listed as collateral anymore." I met his eyes. "No, it isn't. So it's resolved?" "It's protected," I said. "That's all." He looked down, exhaling through his teeth. "You didn't have to—" "I did," I interrupted. "Because you were about to trade something that was never just stone and glass." "You were gambling with a memory." He nodded slowly. the weight of understanding settling on him. I didn't mean to. I know, I said. But intent doesn't change structure. Only design does. For a long time we stood in that heavy, respectful silence. Then he said quietly, I can't fix what I broke, but I can stop breaking more. That will be enough, I answered. He left the room with the posture of someone learning humility, an awkward, necessary grace. Later, Clara found me on the terrace. The light was fading. The sea had turned to liquid bronze. He told me, she said. And? He's ashamed. Maybe that's good. Shame's only useful if it teaches weight, I said. Otherwise it's decoration. She moved closer, resting a hand on my shoulder. You didn't do this to punish him, did you? I shook my head. No, I did it to remind myself that I still had a choice. And now? Now I choose quiet. We stood together listening to the rhythm of the waves. For the first time in years, her hand felt steady in mine. That evening, after they'd gone upstairs, I sat alone in the study. The compass lay beside the final envelope, both catching the faint glow from the desk lamp. I thought of my wife, her patience, her laughter, the way she'd always said that love and architecture share the same secret. Both require maintenance. I realized how much of this had never been about property or pride. It was about maintenance, of self-respect, of family, of boundaries that keep affection from turning into dependency. I wrote a short letter that night. Clara, you don't inherit walls, you inherit lessons. Guard the quiet ones. They'll keep you safe. Daddy placed it in the drawer beside the compass and closed it gently. When I stepped outside, the wind had softened to a whisper. The horizon was a single clean line dividing sea and sky, like the first sketch of a new design. I breathed in the salt, the promise, the peace. Some storms you outlast. Others you learn to build around. The house would stand, so would we. Winter came softly that year. Frost gathered on the terrace railings, thin as breath on glass. The garden fell quiet except for the rustle of dry leaves that refused to let go. I've always admired that kind of persistence, holding on just long enough to understand why you must release. The house had settled into a new rhythm. Clara worked again at her gallery downtown, her laughter echoing down the hall in the mornings when she forgot to worry. Ethan kept to shorter phone calls, the tone different now, measured, transparent. Once I caught him repairing a loose hinge on the gate. Small work, but honest. I didn't say anything. Some changes lose power when praised too early. Each day I rose before dawn and walked through the rooms. Sunlight found its way differently now, sharper through the clean windows. The furniture, the walls, even the silence felt lighter, as though the structure itself had exhaled. Perhaps we all had. One afternoon, Peter drove out to visit. He stood on the terrace with his usual quiet admiration. You built this place to outlast everything, he said. I built it to remember what permanence feels like, I told him. He smiled. Seems it still does. We shared a drink, the polite, wordless kind shared by men who understand closure better than celebration. After he left, I spent hours sorting old blueprints. Among them I found an early sketch of the house. Pencil lines faded, annotations smudged. Across the bottom margin, my wife's handwriting, "Make room for light." She'd added it years ago when I was still obsessed with precision over warmth. I ran my finger along the note and the paper almost felt alive again. She had always seen further than I did. That evening I invited Clara and Ethan for dinner. Nothing elaborate. Roast vegetables, wine, a quiet table. They arrived together, unsure if it was an occasion. Just dinner, I said, smiling. No hidden agenda. The architect's off duty. We ate in peace. Conversation moved easily through safe territory. Work, weather, memories of her mother. When the plates were cleared, Ethan surprised me by standing. I owe you more than an apology, he said. But I'll start there. I gestured for him to sit. Keep it simple, I replied. Apologies are like foundations, only useful if you build something honest on them. He nodded, eyes lowered. Then I'll build better. Good, I said. The house likes effort. Clara reached across the table, touching both our hands. Maybe we can start calling it home again. Maybe, I said. But names matter less than how you live inside them. After they left, I stood at the window a long time. The tide was high, the water reflecting the pale shimmer of the moon. I thought about ownership, how we spend lifetimes claiming spaces, when what truly belongs to us are the choices we make within them. In the study, the compass still rested where it always had, its steel edges cool beneath my fingers. I placed it back in its case beside the letter I'd written to Clara. No need to give it to her yet. Some lessons deserve discovery rather than instruction. Before turning in, I walked the corridor once more, stopping before the family photograph I had turned face down months earlier. I lifted it carefully and set it upright. The glass caught a glint of light, and there we were, 3 versions of ourselves frozen in simpler time. I smiled, not with nostalgia but gratitude. We had survived our own design flaws. Outside, the ocean murmured against the rocks, steady as breath. I opened the terrace doors and let the sound fill the room. The air was cold, honest, alive. People say revenge changes a man, perhaps, but understanding changes him more. The house would remain, its walls carrying every echo, every silence, every forgiveness, and tomorrow, when the light returned through the glass, I would finally stop measuring what had been lost and begin designing what might still be built. If you stayed with me through this story, thank you. Every quiet victory begins with patience. Every storm ends with clarity. If you've ever had to rebuild your peace in silence, like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments below, do you believe patience is strength, or just another form of revenge?